Well, hi there. My name is Void Ghost, and today I'd like to ask you a question. Do archaeologists lie? Now, once in a while, you're going to hear about a discovery that's kind of groundbreaking, that's shaking the foundations of everything we know, or at least a portion of what we know, right? And then most archaeologists are not going to be very thrilled about it, or they're going to be skeptical. They're not going to accept this. Now, there's a monument in Japan, for example, and it's underwater. It's so deep that's quite clear that it was made about 30,000 years ago. And when you compare that to what is widely known and what archaeologists support, well, it just doesn't fit. It puts some civilization at that region in a time where there was supposed to be no civilization. And this is not just one thing. There are things like, the pyramids in Egypt, those three big ones, where there are no tombs inside. No bodies were found there. They don't seem to be like the rest of them. And the Sphinx itself, when a geologist was called to examine it, or maybe he arrived there himself, he took a good look, and what he found was that there was water flowing down the sides of the Sphinx in years past. And then he concluded that this must mean that the statue itself is about 11,500 years ago, because only then Egypt was sufficiently supplied in rainwater or rainfall generally to make this happen. Now, maybe there's another explanation. Right now, I heard about Africa being, or the Sahara Desert actually being a lush jungle about 5 or 6 thousand years ago, which would kind of change a lot of things. There are things found in the desert as we speak. Lost civilizations, for example, ancient rivers, ancient lakes that are no longer lakes, just flat fields of sand now. But there are also artifacts that just don't fit, right? And for example, a female archaeologist found the remains of a village somewhere around Panama, I think. And this was several years ago, but she carbon dated it, and it turned out to be 270,000 years old. Now, what this means is that it totally takes the theory that people generally arrived at the Americas 10,000 years ago. It just throws it into the garbage, right? I mean, it's absolutely not true, and it's not true by a long shot. It's not just a difference of a few thousand years, or even 2 or 3 times. We're talking about 27 times more time than we thought. There are other things like a hammer found in rock, and the rock formation was about 75,000 years, and this was in North America. There are many, many artifacts, and I'm not going to mention all of them here, but you got to understand that they are kind of, well, if not hidden from everybody, because obviously somehow you can gain some knowledge about them. They are hidden in the museums. So sometimes you get something found, it goes to a museum, and the museum puts it in some warehouse of its own, and you never see it again. Why? Because it doesn't fit the narrative. Now, how does that happen? Well, let me answer that to the best of my knowledge. Now, first, let's look at how competent are today's archaeologists. In short, they are very competent. They have a lot of studies they went through, and I once on a vacation I took talked to one archaeologist, and we're seeing these artifacts in a museum because this was in Greece. So we went to Greece, and there's a museum, and he approaches a showcase, right, with some artifacts from Egypt, and the guide tells us something about the whole collection there, and then this archaeologist approaches the goblet and says, "Oh, I can read it," and he starts reading the hieroglyphs. Okay, that was amazing, really, and he just on the spot could read what was written by people at least thousands of years ago. And then I had a talk with him with a drink, generally, not that evening, but some evening later on. And he told me, I asked him, so how much do you actually have to, study? How much languages do you have to pick up? And he said, well, you can get away with knowing about 12 languages, ancient languages, And he gave me an exact order, which one you should learn before another. This is going to make it easier for you to know all of them. And this is, like the basic packet. You might have a few more, of course. And I could assume that, of course, you're not going to be extremely good at all of them. Maybe you're going to be good at one or two, but understand that, okay? You can have a study at a university, and this is about one language, okay? And you're going into some details, of course, about the culture you're studying, etc. But an archaeologist is going to go through so much stuff that it's almost unbelievable. Of course, how much does of that stuff actually sticks with him, I don't know. I think after a while he gets very narrow in what he's researching, and he sticks to that. That's where his expertise goes in, right? So why would such a incredibly educated person not want to explore the possibilities that, say, some other archaeologists found? Or why would he say, no, something's wrong there? Why wouldn't he just, go for the knowledge? Let's go back a while to the 18th, 19th century. You see, back then, archaeologists, or maybe scientists that decided to study archaeology, they were mostly amateurs. That means they did have, of course, some studies on different subjects, but they weren't really what we would call today archaeologists. They didn't have all the information that people today have. They were the ones discovering that information, right? They were the ones putting it together. And they sometimes made mistakes. That's certain. Not an assumption. You could kind of find a lot of mistakes that were made. Now, some were made because, you see, their methods of research were inadequate. So, for example, sometimes this enthusiast would get some money, would organize a trip to some country, and then he would look for a certain type of artifacts, for example, bones. Okay, he wanted to find some bones of a specific type in a region, and then perhaps he would pay the locals for getting him such bones. And this is not authentic. I'm not gonna tell you the exact name of one guy who did that. Probably more did it too. Um, and there's a rule right now, right? If you find something, look at the surroundings because they generally tell you everything. If you dig something up from the ground and you see just the layer of in which this artifact was, it's going to tell you about a lot about it, really. Um, for example, you can estimate its age, right? You can, and when you know its age, you can say, oh, that's when that culture was in this place. So it quite possibly is from that culture, right? And if somebody just brings you something and say, well, yeah, I found it over there, give me my money, then yeah, that's a problem. You can't really say how old it was. Now we have carbon dating, and this changed a lot, but it's not perfect too, because you see, right now we have cities in I think Argentina or Chile, and some of those cities have at least parts that are ancient, and people are just living there. Okay, this isn't like a dig site or something. You got buildings with very thick walls, basically carved out of stone, and people are living there for thousands of years. Now, let's say those people would disappear, go somewhere, die out, and someone else comes and carbon dates a fireplace. He would say, okay, well, yeah, my dating says this is just recent, right? And it's not recent. It's thousands of years old, but it was used till recent times, right? And in the same way, you could theoretically have a site abandoned, and then people would come back after a famine passed, or a plague killed some people, but ages later, the other people, or even the same people, would come back to that place. You don't know what happened exactly, right? You have estimates. You have to guess. And let me give you an example of false guessing. And of course, I'm not saying this is a actual thing, like specifically somewhere someone made this mistake that I'm gonna tell you about, but this is an example. Okay, so imagine this situation. One of the early archaeologists comes to a site in some country, and he starts digging because the locals know that there were ruins somewhere in that region, and he finds a whole, well, kind of small city, pretty much, or maybe just a big village. And he finds some remains of a wall, remains of buildings, and there's one big building in the middle. Now, he checks the contents of the rubble, and he finds some pottery, some oils in that pottery, and maybe some flowers, mummified flowers. He finds remains that suggest there were offerings, right? That these weren't just normal, everyday things that the locals used, but they put them there as an offering. Now, he deducts that that means this was probably a temple, and they worshiped the gods or one god there, and that's because that's how all this functioned. Now, the reality might have been very different. Maybe it was the local noble's house, and maybe he just had these almost temples inside of his house to have the protection of the gods, and he made these offerings. Or another version, Maybe the noble indeed had no offerings, but then a plague came and killed half of the villagers and the noble with his family. And the villagers were kind of shocked because he was like this almost half immortal figure for them. And when he died, they started seeing ghosts or something, apparitions around the house, and they were very, very scared, and no one even dared to go there. But then some, let's say, monk or a priest came and said, look, we need to make offerings so the ghosts don't hunt everybody down. So from that day on, for years to come, they would put offerings in that house, which was basically abandoned, right? You see, three different versions. Now, which one is true? Well, in the archaeologist's mind, the first one. Of course, this isn't just one site he's gonna look at, or maybe he's gonna look at this site, and at this point, when he's putting his mind to it, he's gonna be accepting different ways of viewing this. But when he sets it in, when he says, this is how it was, I'm sure of it, well, then he's probably not gonna change his mind, not easily, at least. Now, let's say another archaeologist a few years later comes to the same country and starts to excavate other sites. And they seem to fit, the same thing. Big building. Oh, that was pretty much the temple. Yeah, he absolutely is sure of that. But then eventually someone down the road, maybe years later, says, I found something weird. Okay, maybe in this case, there's a similar building, but there are no offerings. So maybe the second version was true, and this was a nobleman's house, but this nobleman was either a bit poor and didn't want any offerings, or maybe he changed his religion, or maybe he was kind of cheap and didn't want to sacrifice to the gods, or maybe he just didn't believe in the gods. Whatever the case, this is an anomaly, and the archaeologist looks at this and is puzzled. What should he do? Well, he might just ignore it and just say, you know what, okay, I'll just go to another site. I'm not going to mention that this doesn't look like the previous ones. Or maybe he's going to make a fuss about it. Maybe he's going to rock the boat. He said, maybe he's going to say, hey, everybody, look, it looked different this time. It was different. You're all wrong. You are all wrong. Now, all those archaeologists, especially now, when whatever they know, you got to understand, this is based on previous research. And that previous research is based on even previous research. And you go back and back, and one archaeologist is basing his findings or the interpretation of those findings on others before him. Now, if someone somewhere made a mistake, an honest mistake, but something that just couldn't be cleared up in the years that followed, then now our new archaeologist has the option of angering the whole community with his weird findings, or just stay quiet about those findings. And imagine those people who are now in their 60s, 70s, right? And they already wrote a lot of books and a lot of articles, and they appeared in the news, in TV, and they said, this is how it is. They didn't say, maybe this is how it is, or our best evidence showed that this is how it is. No, this is how it is. This is finite. This is absolutely certain. And then this guy comes and says, no, look, you were all wrong. What do you think they do? take all the books and throw them away. They take all their articles and say, you know what, you were wrong in every case. Or they kind of say, no, we're not going to believe your evidence. We're going to stick to what we know. Unfortunately, it's the second option. And you might not know this, but there's a ton of artifacts that ended up in some shelf somewhere, and the museum that owns it doesn't want to show it to anybody, because why would they? It's going to contradict something that they are saying. Now, sometimes there's a lot of these artifacts on one subject, and eventually the new archaeologists, they will have their minds changed already, and eventually this is gonna show it in what they're gonna be saying. So for example, they're gonna say the same thing in a slightly different manner, but as time passes, they're gonna be more certain about it, or they're gonna put it in clear terms, right? And some changes in the perception of certain artifact sites, they appear somewhere and they slowly push, very slowly. Unfortunately, others might not make it because there were just like a few artifacts found, for example, about something very specific. And the people that found them decided that, they're not going to rock the boat. They're not going to anger all those before them, and they're not going to risk being the new, say, Daniken. Maybe you heard about Daniken. That's the guy who, he quite honestly interpret a lot of things, a lot of findings, other people findings, as alien stuff, ancient alien things. Now, maybe he's very extreme there, but the truth is, it was kind of attacked and ridiculed, and others too. And those others were quite often people that tried to be cautious in what they did. They didn't want to anger everybody, but they found something incredible. They wanted to show it. And the community said, no, that would contradict what we were saying. So let me just give you a few pieces of advice. If you're a young archaeologist and you're at the beginning of your road, right? So first of all, congratulations. You got yourself a great job, and more things are found. But of course, don't anger your superiors. They know what they know. They have a lot of knowledge, but eventually some of that is going to be proven wrong. Maybe you will be the person that proves that wrong. Now, there's nothing wrong with proving them wrong, but you should be very intelligent about it, very clever, okay? Basically, if you see something clearly, don't make statements that are going to be contradicted. Let's say, some statement is not true, probably not, but the community says it is true, and they're sticking with it. But you see, that's not the case. Well, you can say, to the best knowledge of the archaeologist community, this is the truth. Maybe we're going to point out someone else saying something. You're not going to be the decisive factor here. You're not going to be the person that says, no, it's wrong, because they're going to destroy you probably. But that doesn't mean you have to back down. On the contrary, because when this new view is going to pop up, when this new thing comes to the public knowledge, then you are going to be at the forefront of this discovery. You might be the next world-class famous archaeologists that, well, perhaps you didn't discover this, you just formulated your assumptions or your thesis and what you said in a way that you didn't have to say you were wrong later on. So that's probably the best way to approach this, not get ridiculed. But if you find something, and honestly, do try to remember that, humanity's future might be in your hands, really, right? Because if you're gonna hide this, just dump it somewhere, or say, oh, okay, I'll just put the wrong label on it and forget about it, then unfortunately you're gonna be missing an opportunity, not doing your duty, something that you owe every other human being, kind of, and yeah, that's pretty much it. So I hope I kind of clarified. Archaeologists are absolutely top-notch experts on what they talk about, what they study, but at the same time they are human and they will be always focused on what they already know. And if this is not totally true, they just won't want to back down. And of course, they have all their whole careers on the assumptions they made and said that those assumptions are absolute truth, and they will not want them challenged. So that's it for today. I hope I didn't bother you, and the usual thumbs up would be nice if you liked it, even a little. So bye.